righty, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back to Untangle. I am super excited to have Bobbi Martin here. She's a seasoned UX researcher, a strategist and writer who brings systems thinking, storytelling, and empathy to every part of her work. As a mentor and workshop leader, she helps mission driven teams and emerging researchers navigate complexity, ask better questions, whew, and build confidence without jargon or perfectionism. As a writer, she unpacks the missteps and hard earned wisdom that has shaped her human centered approach. I am so excited. I can't wait to dive in. Bobbi, thank you so much for coming to the show. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am great. I am so great. Like we were just talking about, it's been a while since the last time we chatted, so I'm just excited to get caught up with you.
Yeah.
Let's start with Bobbi. Can you tell my audience a little bit about you and how you came into UX research?
Yeah. So I'm kind of one of those a little bit of anomalies. I started web design and development back in the 90s when I was still in high school. And, you know, just started throughout my career. I just worked in federal and state governments, private sector, as well as nonprofit organizations. And at my current position, I started focusing on designing for, based off of data and why people are behaving the way they are. I didn't realize that was really something, UX research, because that was kind of something really in the beginning phases. So when my new manager started about 6 years ago, he pointed out and recognized the potential, and I began transitioning to being a full-time researcher instead of doing design and development and having all those many hats.
So I think, what did I hear? I heard somebody call a full stack researcher. I was like, wait a minute, are we making up terms? But based on your experience, you would be considered like that full stack researcher, what we used to call a unicorn. What do you think about that? How do you feel about being kind of able to do all of it or having at least a working knowledge of all of it?
Well, I think my coworkers would definitely laugh at the idea of calling me a unicorn because I used to have very colorful hair and everything. And this is probably the most normal my hair has looked in like years. So they always are like, Bobbi, when are you going to go back to your blue or your green? So, I definitely have that unicorn potential apparently. But I I like the idea of being a full stack researcher where we have knowledge of all different departments. And I know when I was doing some of my classes and stuff as I transitioned, I know there was the discussion about like kind of like the T model version of a UXer who has a little bit of knowledge of everything at the top level, but then hones in specifically on a specific role like research. So I think for me personally, it actually helps that I have that design and development background because as I'm structuring the studies and questions and research, I have that capacity of translating what our designers and developers are saying into what people may understand a little bit better.
One of the things I think learning that skill of translation can be difficult initially for some researchers. So, what if any advice would you have for those who are kind of struggling to be able to translate for designers or even the engineering team?
Well, that's a good question, especially since I've been in that field for so long. I think as this would definitely apply to people who are coming from academia to, or even with like the HCI kind of background, where it's more like scientific research. I think is really just kind of sitting down, and there's this amazing Reddit thread you channel that says explain it to me like I'm a fifth grader or 5 year old. And I think taking that kind of approach with your designers and developers and saying like, I understand what you're saying. Nobody knows what a hamburger menu is outside of our department. What can I say to explain this a little bit clearer? And kind of taking that approach. And I will say, like, you're going to make mistakes. Like, I use the hamburger menu reference because that's something I said during one of my moderated studies or unmoderated studies. And people are like, I don't know what that means. So definitely take the time and communicate with your team and learn some of those technology that terms and simplifying them, but also look at what your participants are doing and trying to make it easier for them and translate it to them and learn from your mistakes. I think that's the biggest thing is, when you make a mistake, don't just own it and don't try to like be like, oh well, this was their fault. No, own up to it and know that. So just you always keep on learning and don't be ashamed of making mistakes and get them to explain it better to you.
That's the important part, getting them to explain it better. I was at one of the companies and they were doing software designed for customer experience agents, right?
Hmm.
And the development team was like, just teach everybody hotkeys. Okay, I don't own those other organizations. I can't teach everybody hotkeys. But when we
Yeah.
got into it, it was like they wanted me to provide something that was going to be easy to learn, easy for them to code, right? So that was
Hmm.
kind of the takeaway, but I had to ask those questions.
Absolutely.
Okay, now I was looking at your profile, right? And what kind of started us down this journey is this is the first time I have seen research called out in a faith-based organization. So can we talk about that? Were
Yeah.
you already at that company? Was that the actual job rec that you applied for? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so the company I work for is Lifeway Christian Resources, which is a ministry focused organization. We serve churches, which includes pastors, small groups, leaders, individual learners, and so forth. So um, I stumbled into this job, you kind of after I worked with the state of Tennessee for several years, and I kind of got burnt out working in government and everything. So I wanted a little bit something different, something that would actually help support and grow my faith and help others support and grow their faith. So I applied for Lifeway. It took 3 months for me to get hired, if you can believe that. But, I interviewed with IT, I interviewed with marketing, I interviewed with our church resources department. So they really wanted to make sure I was a good fit for that position. And I did start as a designer developer, more so for like WordPress sites and their marketing sites. And then we kind of merged together and became like one whole team that did the marketing sites as well as the e-commerce site and so forth. So one of the things that I love when I started here is like one of their core values is to make it easier for her was what it was, and her being the church. And I kind of embody that as a researcher because, when you lead research, it's to improve the experience for our users within our products, our platforms, and to make it easier for them to find what they want. And that includes, digital tools, ordering flows, user journey, and engagements with our actual products. So, it should be like no surprise though, like, within a Christian company that we try to also root everything in scripture. And one of my favorite scriptures, and usually when I start a presentation, I always lead with it, is from Philippians 2:4, and it says, everyone should not look to their own interests, but rather to the interests of others. And I think that is what I've kind of made my foundation as a UX researcher, is not looking at what we need as stakeholders, designers, and researchers, but what our users and customers.
So when you took on that role, was there already an existing team or it was just you?
It was
Okay.
just me, and it still is just me.
Okay.
So
Okay.
our team is very small. So we have 3 designers, 1 researcher, and a strategist. And our strategist is also our manager. So our team is very small, and I support all 3 of them, as well as now we've been able to kind of break down those silos, and I'm working more with IT, I'm working more with marketing, and really starting to open up the possibilities within our company for UX research.
How did you introduce? Because I did not know that part. So how did you introduce research to your organization?
It was a learning process. I mean, it definitely was, about cutting my teeth and kind of balancing that ability to be firm and saying like and having that authority while also being a little bit more gentle and not trying to step on toes and everything. And I think really what has helped and established that is, our numbers and tracking our numbers. So when we do launch a feature, being able to go back and saying like, hey, we're reducing the number of customer support calls, we're increasing the amount of conversions and things along that line. And even one of our big things is we were having a lot of people not scrolling too far down our site to kind of find out, hey, we have free resources for you. There's other products that support this one. And now we're having a little bit more engagement. So that, of course, numbers always support, but, I think also having recordings, direct quotes from our customers also validates a lot of this. So it started small. And, for me, who has been in UX design and development for 20 years, to like transition and have to also then put that authority there was really intimidating, and lots of imposter syndrome and getting over it. And I still remember my manager sitting me down being like, stop saying you're transitioning to UX research. You're doing it. And I think that was a huge turning point for me as a researcher to be like, you're right, I am doing this and I'm having insights and giving validation within our company. So, it's really been great. Like I've been working with marketing to work on personas and working with our group. I'm also working, we have a research group within our company, but it's more about researching for churches and things like that and everything. So even starting up the possibility of collaborating with them is also showing it. And I mean, it's been, you know, several years in the process and in the making now. So it's great to have that validation. And now when I am at the table, it's not them being like, are you sure about that? Like, show us the evidence. It's like, no, that, we know what the research Bobbi has done and seen, and that, she does speak with authority on that.
So, a couple questions.
Mhm.
So, the metrics that you're using to measure impact. I know my audience is going to ask you, how are you getting access to that data? Who is maintaining that, right? Because I think the question is, how do I do research and then also track everything? So, how does that work for you?
Yeah, so it's a couple different tools altogether, and speaking into like kind of how do I get the access and everything. It is an uphill battle because they're like, I don't know if we want to buy another seat for this, and oh well, XYZ department may need this seat. So again, it's still making that fight and that justification. But I mean, of course, first and foremost, we use Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics. So that helps with a lot of information and data and seeing some behavioral stuff. But we also specifically use a behavioral tool called Full Story, which also allows us to track those metrics. We also get recordings, and they also do a lot of like auto generating any kind of friction points, even kind of rage clicks, dead clicks. So we can kind of look through and break that down. So I end up creating several dashboards for that where I can say, like, even right now I'm working, we did a big launch of our on-demand app. And so that launched on June 20th. So now I can go back and be like, show me the comparison between from June 20th previously and June 20th now, and see where things have changed and improved and track it that way. And it does allow us to do those kind of date ranges and compare them side by side. So the Full Story app has really been very beneficial in that. And in regards of getting access to that one, that was easy to get access to, and learning it has been basically my job, and then educating other people. So that was even part of the education process is, they would get into the tool, but they wouldn't know what to do or how to do some things. And I'm still learning the tool too. But they would set up a different meetings for me, and I would be like, all right, let me show you this tool. And then they come back and be like, look, these are the metrics, the KPIs that we want to track. Can you set up something for us? And that's what I do. So and even now, like I've created, we're still working on a really big process for our personas where we're doing them a lot more data driven and focused on their needs and their behaviors. So we even have personas tracked in there where we can go, okay, let's see what the group of pastors that we know who are known pastors, what they're doing, what they're purchasing, see what their peaks and raises are in that. So that's been a big tool that we use. And in addition, we also use Intercom, which also helps us see what users are contacting people about, our customer support, what they're searching, and things like that. So we can also get a lot more behavioral data and insights that way too. That one was a little bit hard to get because that's a customer support tool. So they're like, if we have another hire, we might be putting you on the back burner. So I work with a lot of different project managers on that and be like, hey, can you generate this report for me? Which a lot of times I don't get pushback because they know that it's going to benefit them in the long run and that information can help them out.
I like that. We're going to add that one to the list. If you can't get a seat, then at least ask for one of those reports. And oftentimes those reports can be, auto generated and
Yep,
sent to you, right? So they don't really have to do anything. So that's great. I'm going to add that to the
exactly.
list. Okay. So you mentioned that you're no longer having to validate your seat at the table, right?
Mhm.
So was there a specific project? Was there a learning? What was it that kind of gained you that credibility?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot. So, I mean, the project that I'm probably most proud of is the dashboards, like I was talking about, because that is something people can see, track, and it's a little bit more tangible to them. And they're seeing like how that can work and progress. And then I'm also now translating it where it might be a little bit controversial within the UX community, but I'm developing AI agents based off of those personas. So then our marketing team, our IT team, our product team can kind of engage with them and kind of get some initial insights as well. But I would say probably the product project that I really cut my teeth on is that we ended up we're still working on it, and I mean, and that's the kind of the way of the road with e-commerce sites, or we are always trying to find a great solution and trying to improve everything. So one of the things that we did is kind of enabling and allowing multivariants on our product pages and allowing them to kind of choose those kind of things, which, if you're familiar with like Amazon and things like that, it's kind of easy. Like, oh, I like this shirt, but I want it in blue. There's an option. But with our products, they're so like diverse. And I'm not saying like Amazon products aren't diverse, but it's not a one size fit all solution. So something that might be for, one of our popular products is our communion cups. Well, okay, that might not be the same as somebody buying a Bible that has several different covers that they can choose from. So that was really kind of a challenge to try to find the best solution for people. And even now, working still within the multivariant options, where a lot like kind of choosing this option where people can guide and create their own bundles for our curriculums, which is very complex because not there's people who are pastors and administrators who are buying in bulk, and then you also have individuals who are just buying one of the workbooks for themselves. So trying to find that balance is a little bit difficult. And we even found like, okay, this super guided version of it, while it was successful, it wasn't really successful because it was so guided. They just were like click click click. They weren't really reading through and trying to decide what was best. So in that case, is like maybe the ultra guided kind of simplified version wasn't the best solution. Maybe something that actually makes them pause and think about it, each step, is a little bit more beneficial. Those have been really challenging and fun to kind of see, and really allows us the opportunity to get to know our users because we're seeing those behaviors, because we're seeing those moments of pause and everything in our studies.
One thing that you and I talked about before, which has actually caused me to add a whole nother kind of topic type for the conference next year,
Mhm.
is this idea that we don't really talk about failures, things that went wrong, right? Like
Mhm.
we don't talk about, hey, we thought this thing, we went a different way. Here's what we learned. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So that's like
Yeah.
a big part of what you believe. So can you talk us through that?
Yeah. I think failure is a great thing. I know that might sound weird to a lot of people, but I think it's a good thing to fail because those are moments of growth. And I'm trying to remember there was a book I just read. It was called Mistakes I Made at Work. And it was a book about all these women and mistakes they did and learned from, that are from like every background. And I think that was a really interesting read because it validated what I think, because I don't think of failure as a bad thing. I see it as a growth opportunity. It's like, okay, I failed at this, but let me see how I can change and improve my abilities. Sometimes that's one of the reasons I love these like unmoderated recordings, because not only are they kind of savage about the prototypes, they can be savage to about us researchers and what our questions and things and framing. And those moments, it's like, oh, yeah, he's right. That wasn't a really good question. And it gives me the opportunity to learn. And I think throughout my whole career, some of the biggest successes come from when I have failed. And I remember even like, because so much of my career has been as an individual, not as a team. And then working at Lifeway, I've been part of a team. And taking those moments of actually being humble and saying, hey, I need help with this, I'm not understanding this, has led to deeper connections within my team and a lot more trust within the team. And even with now within research, when I go, hey, look, this failed, I need to rerun this test, I don't see that again as an issue. I see that as admitting, taking ownership, like I said earlier, and like moving on and acknowledging that, because deep down, my designers, developers, and the project owners all want real good data and valid data. And if I messed up, that data is no longer valid. And so they've learned that I'm growing in this process and then everything. So they've given me that grace to grow and learn and make those
Do
mistakes.
you have any best practices for kind of how you fail gracefully?
Well, I think this could be both within UX research and in real life in general, I guess. But I just think taking the ownership and admitting it is the biggest thing. I know I feel like I'm a broken record with that. But, I remember there was a moment where I messed up really big and it was something on our e-commerce site. And it was because I was like, I can do this. I know I can do this. I'm not going to ask for help. I need to establish my, role within the team. And I messed up and it took me to go like approach my manager at the time and be like, hey, I did this and I don't know how to fix this. And, thankfully it was something we were able to get to. And he's like, hey, if you ever get to a point like this, you're in a team. Realize there's others here to support you. And I think that's something we also need to realize too, is that not only your team at work, but as a UX community, like we are really needing to support each other and be like, hey, what do I do to solve this? What do I do to improve this? And lean into those support options that we have and realize that, you know, it's not a bad thing to make a mistake and to do it gracefully. I think it's just to take ownership and to fix it as soon as possible.
I love that. Okay. Changing gears, this is my favorite question to ask another researcher, but do you have a favorite methodology?
I think it might be pretty obvious right now, like with some of the references I've made, but I love unmoderated testing and studies. I like that people tend to be a little bit more raw and honest because
Mm.
they don't have to deal with the filter of somebody sitting there narrating, asking questions. We get to see the actual pain points, their thoughts, their pauses, and they don't really think about who they're trying to impress. So, you know, I often hear, what is genuinely being said and needed during those unmoderated sessions. And, our customer base has been with us since fax, since email, and they also had to deal with the fact that we closed all our storefronts. So having some of that raw honesty as we're transitioning to like an e-commerce only option brought a lot of growth pains, a lot of friction points, and a lot of value to their feedback. And there's a lot of humility, like I said earlier, in conducting those unmoderated, studies, whether with our customers, with a panel, or just in general. It's just like, okay, I see what I did wrong and what we need to do. And, and some of the best quotes and moments of like giving those aha moments to our designers, developers, and product owners come from those recordings. So I think they've had a huge impact with my skills and abilities as a researcher as well within our organization.
I was gonna ask you about that. I didn't know if I could ask you about that, but since you
Okay.
brought it up, how did your role, or how was your role, if at all, impacted by the closing of the stores? Because, like you said, we've shopped at Lifeway my entire life, right?
Yeah.
Like, so then to not have a store that I could run into on Saturday to get communion cups for Sunday, it's a little jarring. So, how did that impact your role?
So thankfully for us, we already kind of were tracking some of that, like some of the issues with people transitioning to online ordering. So we kind of were ahead of the curve, even with when COVID hit. We had already started the process of closing them down. So I'm not going to lie, it hasn't been easy. And I would have to say, like, if I had a nickel for every time I either heard a customer, a study, a survey response, I was like, bring back the stores. It would, I wouldn't need to be doing research. So it's kind of been an uphill battle. And, some of the things, that's an obvious friction point. But I think with the site itself, people are starting to get more familiar and comfortable with shopping online. So it's not been as dramatic for that part. I think the thing that people miss the most about our stores is, like you said, like the ease of access to our new products, but also, a lot of our store members and employees serve, even our customer support too, serve as its own ministry too, where they are able to help people sometimes in the most difficult situations and transition into a different stage of their lives. It wasn't uncommon to hear stories about people coming in and being like, hey, so and so passed away. I need materials and help about grief. And being able to provide that ministry to them in the spot, it was, in a way, very intimidating, to be an employee at a store and have that kind of responsibility. But I think that's what people are missing, is that, and we're still actively trying to, build that experience of, going into the store, looking at a Bible and having that feel. Because I don't know if you're the same way, but, I jump between all sorts of translations. So, I'm always like, let me see what this scripture says in this translation. Let me feel it. Let me see the paper. And you miss that when you don't have a storefront. So it's like, how do we provide that same experience for our users online, when that's been something that's been important? And even, being able to read along with a Bible study to see if it's a good match. So, we understand that, and that is something we actively pursue and try to provide. Like, even right now, we've provided a lot of different options where people can explore their Bibles a little bit more. And I'm not trying to, because that's also one of our curriculums, so I'm not trying to confuse people, but just trying to actually physically see it and have like measurements and portions and let them actually see what the scripture looks like within the Bible as well. So we've realized a lot of our users depend on product images. So that is definitely something we, invest in a lot in trying to improve on our website.
Okay. Um, so thinking about how you conduct research, I question sometimes if research is still as rigorous as we like to think,
Mm.
right? So I will ask you kind of like, what does good research look like to you? What is rigor to you? Like, what does that feel like for you as a researcher?
Well, one thing I've always loved about like the UX field in general is that your day is never the same. What yesterday brought is not going to be the same as today brought. And I think even one reason I love doing research so much is because I consider myself like an ambivert. I can be extroverted when I need to be and introverted when I want to be. So I can have this interview and get that extrovertedness out, and then I get to hide in my little data cave and process and analyze. But I think, I don't think of it as being very rigorous. I think there's certain things, like certain flows and protocols and procedures that I flow and have developed as a solo researcher, that makes it easier for me to do my job. And that's probably where a lot of my structure comes from. But especially like when we're working on like the e-commerce site, I kind of take almost like a waterfall approach to the testing, where it's like, let's test this aspect. Okay, this one was successful. Let's test this aspect plus that. Let's keep building it off. So it's not uncommon for me in a week, especially when working with our e-commerce site, that I may conduct anywhere from like 3 to 5 studies a week and am analyzing them because they're so kind of quick, and fast paced. It's just, kind of getting it done, get the quick process and move on kind of thing. In those cases, that's definitely where like the quantitative data is king in that one, and not so much the qualitative. But I think this is answering the question, but
Yeah, no,
it's
yeah.
not very rigorous, where I don't, since I'm only me, it's not really something very strict and confined. It's a lot more free form. And thankfully, I get the opportunity to be like, hey, I think this would be better served as a study. Hey, I think this is better as an A/B test. Hey, let's do interviews. So I don't really have too much like, I guess, like restrictions on what I can do and how I can do it.
Thinking about kind of how you've grown this in your organization,
Mhm.
have you, is there an because I know it's happened, but is there a story you can share with us where there was some resistance or you had to work harder than normal to like make the point and get research and tell the story?
Yeah, I think the bottom line is project owners always think they know their customers and what they want. And I think that's kind of where some of the resistance has happened is when research has proven against that. So for example, I was talking about like the guided approach. That was something a like that was like, hey, this is going to work. This is perfect. This is going to walk them through. And that was tested as not, the best option. So that confidence can turn into like a little bit of resistance when research shows the opposite and something different. So I've had to show like user recordings, direct quotes, the quantify, the quant data, the qualified, the qual data as well, and break through some of those assumptions by doing that. And I think the turning point usually occurs when it isn't something like a chart, but actually hearing and seeing what our users are struggling with. And something that the team might have thought was intuitive is actually showing the exact opposite. And, just staying in the idea that like advocacy isn't confrontation, it's clarity. And I think that's something us researchers really need to stand on is that fact is like we are the user's advocate and we're here to advocate for them. And we're not trying to be confrontational. We're just trying to bring that clarity to what the project is.
You said something. I love that. So I have a 16-year-old son, and so we're focused on clarity, and he thinks it's a problem. No, son, we just want to make sure that we are on the same page, talking about the same
Communication.
thing, so we don't have to do this part again.
Yeah,
Absolutely, researchers have to stand on clear. If no one else is seeking clarity, that should absolutely be us. Okay, so
absolutely.
thinking about where we are, there are all kind of conversations about where UX is going. So I'll ask you, what are your thoughts on where UX research, UX is going? What's influencing that? Let's talk about that.
Well, I mean, I kind of touched upon it already is about like the AI usage and how to use it ethically within our group. And I think in general, a lot of companies and fields and roles are actually having that same discussion. I am very pro AI, but I don't see it as being a backbone. I see it as being a tool that we can use to help us, especially as a solo researcher. You know, we jokingly say that my AI tool is Bobby Fett. Instead of Boba Fett, it's Boba Fett. So, I have cloned myself essentially to help me like streamline processes. But I see that being in a very emerging trend and still a challenge about how we balance the ability to like have AI analyze data for us because it's not perfect. So we still need to go back over it and refine it and make sure it's accurate. I think also one thing I think is a big challenge is that whole kind of quiet drop off. Those quiet signals that people are leaving that don't trigger complaints. It's not like they're not going to stop coming to your site and complain to customer support. They like, where's that happening? Why is that happening? And I know like with us, one of the big things is, our competitors. Like, we know Amazon can deliver it in 2 days and Lifeway may not. So we see a lot of drop off where people might be looking at the product, add it to their cart, but then they're like, let me go check to see what the price is on Amazon or here and there. So, that kind of quiet drop off that we see is like they like our products, but they're not purchasing them from our site. Um, Also, I think for just designing for trust. I mean, I think so many websites anymore now and companies lack some trust with their customers because of certain practices and things they've done, and realizing that engagement and loyalty is due to trust and not because it's the best price and stuff like that. Like the other day, like my daughter's birthday is today, so I ordered something from Amazon and the packaging was horrible and like damaged and everything like that. Well, guess what? That's going to make me kind of second thought, guess about ordering that and when I could maybe go to Walmart or Target or somewhere else and get it for an equally same price. So I think we just got to learn that while engagement and conversion is important, building that repertoire with our customers is equally important.
So the quiet drop offs, that's probably because I don't do a lot in e commerce
Mhm.
typically. But Um, I haven't heard that term like that before. So quiet drop offs. Does that fall? Is that a UX issue? Is that a sales issue? Who do we take those concerns to in your organization?
Short answer is yes. I mean,
Yes.
it's kind of all
I
that,
mean, yeah.
we can't necessarily adjust the price because and go to sales and be like, "Hey, why can't we make this $2 cheaper to compensate for delivery? Hey, why can't we, go to marketing and all these other things?" And, because these are conversations we have had throughout because, as I think Amazon in general, and I keep throwing Amazon under the bus, but when they started establishing Prime and that delivery schedule, a lot of e-commerce sites have not been able to live up to that. So it's a matter, again, kind of going back to the trust and loyalty aspect, making sure people not only trust our products and that they're like biblically sound, but trust us as a company. Like, hey, and I mean, I don't know how to do this efficiently, but building up, like by purchasing through Lifeway, you are supporting Lifeway. Purchasing a Lifeway product through Amazon, you're more so supporting Amazon. And trying to establish that mindset is something that we struggle with, and I think a lot, like I said, a lot of e-commerce sites struggle with. So it's not just an IT problem, it's not just a UX problem or marketing, it's a whole entire company problem. And kind of bringing that awareness is, something we're working on, and I think that's a phase and a part of my career that I want to get to the point where I can have kind of more of that data scientist role where I can predict some of these like potential issues and address them before they become issues. And that's kind of why I started referring it to like the kind of the quiet drop off, because like I said, there's no reason, no rhyme, no logic. And once they leave our site, we don't know why. So all we know is that they didn't return. And so that's why I call it quiet. It's like one thing when you can go, like I said, report it to customer service or have them like say, hey, look, why is it more expensive on Amazon? Well, that's trackable, but them
Right.
just leaving and not coming back is not trackable. Therefore,
Yeah, because if they're making noise, they're still engaged, right? You
exactly.
have an opportunity to fix it versus they just kind of drop off. Where do I want to go next? So one thing that you said, and this wasn't, I didn't even ask you about this, but it's just kind of one of the things that I'm noticing from how you're talking through these things.
Mm,
You are what I would consider a lifelong learner and a pivoter. Okay.
hmm
So let's start with pivoting first. What are some, for those who are not really sure,
Yeah.
right? So I'm a horrible mentor, Bobby. When people ask me, I'm like, could I get into UX? No, find something else, right? I'm a horrible mentor. And I know that. But I also know to ask these questions of other people. So for people who are like, should I pivot? Should I not? What are
hmm
some things that they might want to look for, or some signs or indications that it might be time for them to pivot? Not necessarily out of UX, but whatever that means, but pivot. What
Yeah.
should they be looking for?
Well, I will say, like, even though, like I said, my manager kind of was like, hey, you're already doing this, let's give you the official title. Part of the reason I started doing that, and at one point I was even thinking of transitioning into project management because I like the idea of data gathering, making solutions, making options, and doing that. And I love that process. And part of it was because, I've been in the field for 20 years and like, I started looking, I'm like, we could hire somebody that's much younger, much cheaper, who could come into this position and do a better job because like keeping up with like Angular, CSS, any of those kind of different things and technologies that are constantly coming out is very labor intensive, especially the older you get, I feel. But, it's kind of one of those things like I saw that my trajectory was not going to be continuing with design and development because my skills and abilities weren't able to keep up with it. So one of the things I did, because Lifeway went through a transition 6 years ago, we got a new president, and usually a lot of times when things like that, reorg happens, layoffs happen. So I wanted to make sure to kind of develop my skills and abilities to be able to stay on board, essentially. It might be sound a little selfish, but self-preservation is real. And right. And I ended up taking a UX course through Coursera, which is like a Google. like training tool and education tool. And that's when I saw like the structure of like the T model for UX, where, there's people who are completely linear that have like skills in all over in different areas, but they need to focus on one specific area to really kind of, you know, grow and be like a better professionally. And that's also when I started kind of learning about the UX research role then too. And so that kind of really opened my eyes to that possibility because I still love UX, I still love design, I still love development, but the fact that I could do something like research and do the project management and creating all that really appealed to me. Like I said, I started taking even like the PMP classes and things like that in order to transfer to like project management more and doing that data research. That was a big turning point to me is realizing like what our pastor always says, what is your 10? It's like, yeah, what that was my 10 is organizing, structuring, and all that data. So I was like, yeah, I know how to do PHP, I know how to do CSS, I can work in Figma, XD, and all that, but I'm not great. Like, I don't go pixel perfect. I don't want to do all those libraries. So it was came to the point where I'm like, all right, yeah, I this is what I like to do. Now, my advice, see if anybody who is at that pivotal point is to kind of just start slow. Like, there's tons of free webinars out there, and I still go to webinar after webinar and everything like that. Like I said, there's also the UX community where you can kind of learn. There's people posting jobs up there, things like that. One of my favorite things I do is I do my like a challenge. So one of the nice things Lifeway does is every last Friday of the month we have something called Focus Friday, where we can do whatever we want. We can do like catch up on our projects. We could take a class, anything along that will help us professionally. So I like to kind of just, I found a couple of random generators and it's like, all right, generate a color palette, generate a theme and, some other little assets and create like a little website. And it's even kind of the same thing like with, I've started trying to do it for UX research. It's like, okay, here's the sample data. What would I do as a survey or what would I do as my method to find out data for this? And just challenging yourself like that. I know a lot of people be like, build up a portfolio, do these things like that. And in some ways it's true. And, so I think that's always helpful too, is like when you see an opportunity, use it. There's even a Reddit group, I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's random data that you can take and kind of create a project around and create a thing around. Um, so I think those are kind of the ideas I would have for somebody who's interested in it and interested in pivoting is like just start learning about it and see if it's something you like. Um, I was a little bit worried because like when I started doing the webinars and transitioning, I saw so many people with like the HCI master's degree and PhDs, and I was like, I ain't any of that. And being a full-time employee, having two kids, I'm like, nope, I can't go back and get a PhD or a master's at this time. So I do a lot of courses and I get a lot of certifications through those courses. And I think that is extremely helpful. Don't dive headfirst into like getting your, Nelson, you know, certificate. That's expensive. And if it's not something you're sure about, don't go for it. But you can take these like little Coursera classes for like $45 and find out if it's something you want. And you get a certification that you can put on your LinkedIn account. So at least you still have something along those lines to show that, even if you don't decide to pursue it. So I know that was a lot of information and I'm sorry and
So many good
details.
nuggets. So many good nuggets. My
Good.
my favorite part in there, right, is to start down the path, start exploring it,
Yeah.
right? Because you may get into it and you're like, you know what, I didn't know about that part. I
Yeah.
don't love that. This may not, or you get to a point where you're like, I'm absolutely in love with this thing and I want to put more behind it. So
Yeah.
just starting down that path, the best part of all of that.
Agreed. I
Uh,
mean, it is just get started. Just start trying and see what happens. Don't quit your job. Don't start into a UX position, but, explore it.
giggle, and I love those people, but I also giggle at people who are like, I threw away everything. I'm starting. wait, we need a job. We need to
Yeah,
pay for this right now, right?
right?
Um,
So true.
you you also talked about managing all of this work and
Yeah,
knowledge and trying to better yourself. But I also heard you say you have two kids.
I do. Yes.
All
I have a
right, so
15-year-old and an 8-year-old.
oh, okay. So when do you find the time then to learn? Because I've heard you say things that I know are time intensive. I heard you say
Yeah.
you have an agent. I've heard you say you're using AI. You having to learn all of these tools. Like, and I hope you're gonna say what I think you're gonna say because I need
Oh,
people to hear it. Like,
okay.
how are you finding this time?
I hope I don't fall short of this
You
expectation.
I already know, Bobby. I already know.
I know that if you can't quite tell, I love quotes and I love kind of a good quote. And I remember hearing one that was like, if it's important, you'll make time. And that's kind of the truth of the matter is, both of my kids are very much quality time kids. So I make sure to play a couple of rounds of Fortnite. I make sure to do that. And then once they kind of, we have our family dinner, we do all those things. And then at the end of the day, before I go to bed, that's my time to learn and my time to grow. Whether it is to take a class, whether it is to do a webinar, or whether it is to take a bubble bath and listen to a book. It's time that you need. And one thing I love too is my manager is amazing and he understands that sometimes your best thinking comes while you're on a 15-minute walk. And if you need to take that 15-minute walk, take it. And I've had the pleasure of also being a remote employee for almost 9 years at this point. So the being able to balance that work life, kind of learning and all that stuff, has been definitely helpful with it being at home. But I also have the flexibility, and whether my team likes it or not, sometimes they get a message or an email at 2 a.m. because I had this epiphany and I've just been working with the data for all that long and I need to get it out of my brain. So then when I talk to them, at a reasonable hour, I can bring it back. So my manager's always like, "Why are you awake?" I'm like, "I'm working on a project, man. So gotta do it." But I just think, there was a point in my life where my health was really taking a hard hit with all the stress that I was putting on myself. So then going back to even the quote, like, if it's important, you'll make time for it. It really allowed me the opportunity to, one of my favorite words is the word cleave, because cleave means to either bring together or take apart. So I went through my cleaving season, I said, and it was like removing things that weren't necessary and wasn't helping me grow in the different aspects of my life. I like to jokingly say it's like kind of the three F's is like faith, finances, and fitness was the other one. And so if it wasn't growing me in those areas and aspects, oh, and family was in that. That sounds bad that I left family out. But, then I kind of backed away from it. And that really was a moment that I am very grateful for because I am a volunteer. I volunteer for so many things, and reducing that number made me focus on things that were important, like my career, my family, and my health, and really kind of take that opportunity for myself.
I know people can't tell, right? But like I have learned the word no. Not obvious,
Likewise.
but I've learned the word no, and that is such it is. It sounds like you went through like a life audit, right? Like
Hmm.
what where do I need to show up, and what are some
Yeah,
of the things that it may not be a no forever, but it's a not right now.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so I hope you get a lot of traffic to your LinkedIn page because I'm going to tell everybody that you have awesome content.
Good, good. I'm glad to hear
I
that.
like your content. I think it's cute. I think it's engaging. I think it's transparent. So I'm going to dig into a couple of things that stood out to me that have sat with me. Okay.
Okay.
One of them was thinking about like your transition into research, and you had an article, three lies that you believed about research. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah, so that was a fun one to write because the first kind of few articles I started writing was about me reflecting on that transition. And so the first lie I had was you don't need a big team to do research. You can start, like, again, going back, you can start right now and do research right now. And so, like, I used to think that UX research needed to have a team. You needed somebody who would do this and do that and do this. But the truth is, being a solo researcher means just creating protocols, procedures, toolkits that could streamline your process overall, and embracing the tools that you have. Like I said, with like Full Story and Intercom, and even AI to a degree, being able to do that and embracing the tools that are within the tools. So like even Full Story now has a way that it generates like potential trends and summaries and stuff like that, helping you kind of eliminate another step or even sometimes getting an insight. So my first lie was that I needed to have more people. I needed more support and things like that. Um, so the second lie was, and this one is very, if any of my coworkers hear this one, is that if it isn't from our customer, it doesn't matter. Um, with us being a Christian organization, sometimes creating a panel through like user testing and user Zoom, which is what we use for a lot of our studies, is a little bit of high risk. And so I've had to learn, and I should say, like, so the lie was that the only valid insights and data comes from our actual customers who use our products, who have a direct impact on our revenue. But while and the truth is, like I said, working in user testing and user Zoom, I've managed to create a whole entire filtering system that while they may not be Lifeway customers, they are the potential Lifeway customers. Those are the people we are trying to get and trying to bring to our site. And sometimes those insights are more beneficial because they are outsiders. They are not familiar with our products or site. And sometimes they can provide the best insight. I mean, they always, it's like, so I always get the question, like, who were these people? And it's like, well, they were Christians who were familiar with Lifeway, who had bought a product from like within the year. And sometimes if it's like a Bible study or Bible or whatever, then they've had to have participated in 6 months. And then I give them a list of products that are Christian-based products or companies and ask them which ones they're familiar with. And, I love putting that little, I forget what they call it, but it's basically a fake company and a fake product in that. So then I'm not getting the people who are just check, 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 check. So that kind of eliminates those people and people who are not, maybe familiar with it. So, it's kind of fun to come up with like names like, oh, the daily devotionals, and it's like that could be a real product, but is it? So so that has been great. And you know a lot of that has also been going back to like the failures and mistakes I've made when I wasn't doing that, because I was like, oh, we're just doing like an actual usability test, like how functional this is. It doesn't matter if they're Christian or not. And we got a lot of really interesting commentary about people like commenting on Christianity and things like that. And so, that's where a lot of that came from. So, but at the same time, it's like by refining that, we've gotten some really great data. And I think that's also been one of my biggest struggles too, is our customers are not always open to the idea of doing studies and interviews. A survey is no problem. They will do surveys for days, but actually getting them to engage with a prototype is a little bit difficult for us. So, having that panel and having it refined has been a lifesaver. So the third one is that if it's not quantitative data, it doesn't count. Like I thought it had to all be the numbers. The numbers was what mattered. Something about quantitative data made it feel a lot more legitimate and give me more confidence. But what I learned, and the truth is, while numbers are helpful and they just don't provide the whole picture. So a single clip, a single quote, and even like in a presentation can shift a team's thinking much faster than being like, well, 20% of the people did XYZ. So showing them that 20% and how it struggled has a lot more strength and value to it at times. I like to think of it like qualitative data guides and persuades and builds empathy, whereas the quantitative data shows that supports that part of it. And especially when you're the only researcher, sometimes being able to like make an emotional impact and on them matters more than just showing the numbers too. So if they can leave with like knowing better and knowing more about our customers and building that empathy, then I've done my job as an advocate. So those are
Yeah.
the three lies.
Those are good. Those are good, especially for those people who are thinking about who are kind of where you are, and
Mhm.
those people who are thinking about coming into research. I think there are a lot of misconceptions, and you hit all of them right around kind of what this looks like or how it looks. The other thing is kind of like you said, you have different stakeholders, and you may have to change that messaging. And one thing
Yeah,
may resonate here and may not resonate here. So giving yourself the flexibility to kind of do that.
absolutely.
Okay. I don't know if we have enough time for this last question before we start to wrap it up. But
Okay.
you mentioned that you are using Qualtrics called it synthetic users. I don't know
Mhm.
what you call it, but like having like these personas and then trying to figure out like how are people going to respond based on this. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is the third, I think, incarnation of our personas. And so this one is using a lot of data from all different resources. So we've have, you know, defining roles through Intercom and surveys they've taken. We've then created full story segments and kind of started tracking all sorts of different metrics through that. I think I have like 5 different dashboards like showing and focusing on like their behaviors, friction points, where their journeys are. So then we can get that data and I'm able then to go, okay, this is the list of known administrators. Let's see what they typically go through because the first versions were like, yeah, this is we did a survey, this is what they say they're looking for. But when we looked at the actual data, it's like, oh, actually they spend a lot more time not in church supplies, but in ordering, curriculum and studies and Bibles and customizing Bibles. So that was that part of it. And then we're in the process right now of surveying them and kind of breaking it down so we get more of like the information of their demographics and kind of like the mental part of it. So we learn about their hobbies, their desires, what they want, things like that. So we can break it down even more. So throughout this whole process, I'm able to then take the data like from Full Story especially, take those dashboards, export it out into a spreadsheet, and upload it within the persona, like into the actual persona agent, as well as the personas that we have created, like with the breakdown and the different components and things like that. So then it gets a more well-rounded persona in this agent and treating it almost as if it is a person. So we've come up with like funny little monikers. It's like Peter the pastor and, Anna the, administrator and then and so things like that. So the idea, and I'm still working and developing this, is then what can happen is, our marketing team or our sales team can come in and be like, look, we have this product that's marketing specifically to this group of people. Let's talk to them and have like a mock phone call with them as if we're doing like almost like a cold call with them and seeing what their interactions was and what they could kind of get some insights in. And even to a degree of like, having the product owners coming in and asking questions like, what is the top need or frustration you have as a youth pastor? What is something that you experience that we need to kind of address? And they can take it from an e-commerce lifeway.com aspect or even from within their church aspect as well. So kind of understanding is like, well, as a youth pastor, I'm experiencing an influx of students who are leaving and I don't know how to approach that. And so what would be ideal is then, okay, what would you prefer? Would you prefer a product? Would you prefer an article? Would you prefer like what kind of product would help you support you better? And then we can kind of cater to that a little bit more. It's like, okay, they would like an article about how to retain the student ministry and build that. And so that's kind of the idea, at least my big picture that I have for creating these like agent personas. And again, I know this is a very like highly discussed and controversial topic, not only personas, but also involving AI in it. But I see the potential of it being interacting, like you said, with like a synthetic user that's is a synthetic user, but it is based off of our data and our information and not necessarily going through like synthetic users to kind of engage with that.
So I'm gonna reach out to you in like 3 months. I'm gonna ask you how this is going, right? Because
Sounds good.
I am curious, right? Because I'm open minded. You already know my concerns, but like I'm
Yeah.
open minded. Bobby, you have been amazing, and I want to be mindful of your time. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to leave with the audience? Anything else that you would want to take away from this conversation?
No, this has been great. I've really enjoyed our conversations. I know we definitely had a lot of different topic points, and some of them we didn't get to. So I am open. If you need some more time, we can definitely do that. But I just really just want to I want people to realize that research is for everybody, but it's not necessarily always going to be for everybody. It's definitely a passion you have to have. And you got to be, like I said, kind of that ambivert where you have to be extroverted and introverted at the same time. And, I know a lot of people are trying to get into UX research, and I hope I like made their awareness and understanding of how I conduct research, you know, is and maybe give them some insights. But I'm just one researcher. I know there's tons of researchers out there who may have a different approach, and just explore it and just be open to all the different methodologies and ways to be a researcher.
Okay, I was on mute. I was like, thank you so much for joining. I'm gonna drop the link so everybody has access because I personally love your content. So hopefully you'll get some uptick there. And I apologize. Hopefully I won't break anything. But you've been amazing, Bobby. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, and hopefully I'll be able to post in 3 months an article about my persona agents and see how it goes from there.
And tag me. So I
Will
am
do.
there. So I am ready to. Yes. You have an amazing week. Thank you so much, Bobby.
Thank you. You have a great day too. And
You
thank you for
too.
the opportunity.